Welcome to The Big Rich Show. This podcast will focus on conversations with friends and acquaintances within the four-wheel drive industry. Many of the people that I will be interviewing, you may know the name, you may know some of the history, but let's get in depth with these people and find out what truly makes them a four-wheel drive enthusiast. So now's the time to sit back, grab a cold one, and enjoy our conversation.
Whether you're crawling the Red Rocks of Moab or hauling your toys to the trail, Maxxis has the tires you can trust for performance and durability. 4 wheels or 2. Maxxis tires are the choice of champions because they know that whether for work or play, for fun or competition, Maxxis tires deliver. Choose Maxxis. Tread victoriously.
Why should you read 4Low Magazine? Because 4Low Magazine is about your lifestyle, the four-wheel drive adventure lifestyle that we all enjoy. Rock crawling, trail riding, event coverage, vehicle builds, and do-it-yourself tech, all in a beautifully presented package. You won't find 4Low on the newsstand rack, so subscribe today and have it delivered to you. On this week's episode of Conversations with Big Rich, we will be talking with Phil Howell. Phil has led a very full life with jobs or careers that span a long list. From record DJ, celebrity photographer, fighter pilot, Jeep tour operator, magazine editor, and to being the true godfather of competitive rock crawling. Let's talk to Phil about his very interesting life. Today we have Phil Howell. Phil, I'd like you to share with us your life story. I know that there's a lot of things behind the scenes that you've done that especially any of the newer people that are into off-road have no idea about. And some of us guys that have been around since the 80s don't know the whole story. So Phil, we're asking you the whole story. Let us have it. You know, where did you grow up at?
Okay, I was born in Upland, California. And then right after I was born, my parents moved to Red Hill in Cucamonga, which is now Rancho Cucamonga. But it wasn't fancy when I grew up there. There was like, I can't remember. The altitude was the same as the population. Oh, it was 1,200 feet above sea level, and it had 1,200 people on the sign, that the California sign as you drove into the city limits. But when I grew up there, it was orange groves and vineyards. I mean, that was the major industry there, was agriculture. And even though we only lived 45 minutes out of LA, we were over the hill in the Inland Empire, and it was like a world away from Los Angeles. Although we still use the freeways to get everywhere. but anyway, so I grew up there. It was really a lot of fun. I liked to go exploring. I was in Boy Scouts. We used to hike. They were right at the foot of the San Gabriel Mountains, so hiked up to all the peaks. I used to go on 50-mile hikes in the Boy Scouts up on the John Muir Trail every summer. And that was a blast. And I think that's what started me getting interested in exploring. I just loved to go out where there weren't that many people, or where people had been but weren't anymore. I loved history. And in high school, I spent all week on my free time. I'd go in the library, and the school had a pretty good library, and they had guidebooks like Russ Letterbrand's California Byways, and which was printed by AAA, the Automobile Club. And he talked about not only paved roads, but dirt roads and ghost towns. And I would read the Desert magazine, of course, and read all kinds of stuff about ghost towns. And then on the weekend, go out and explore. My dad had brought home a 1966 Yamaha Trailmaster 80, which in those days there weren't any, the mini bikes were mini bikes, with a Briggs and Stratton motor on them.
Right, and no suspension.
Yeah, no suspension, had a tube frame and a Briggs and Stratton, but I never had one of those. And I'd look at my friends that did with just envy. And my dad brought home a Yamaha Trailmaster 80, brand new, and it was a full-size motorcycle. And so I learned to ride on that. And probably 67, 68 I got a CL77 Honda 305 Scrambler, which nowadays we look at that, it'd be laughable to take off-road. But all I did was pull the muffler off the twin pipes, which were high because it was a Scrambler. You know, the Scrambler had been used though in the Baja 1000 in the Nora, one of the very first races. The Scrambler was used and won. I don't remember which year, but anyway, rode that, then kept getting into it. My friend, a guy named Sean Packer, his parents started a business called Allied Motorcycle Salvage. And they bought all these old bikes, and then I would work for them alongside Sean. We'd strip these insurance wrecks for parts. I made a little money there and was able to buy a Bull Taco. And first I had an old Campera, which no one knows about because it was kind of just an obscure Spanish nothing. And then I got a Matador, which had won the international 6-day trials, and not my bike, but that model. Right. And then got a Persang. And we'd ride these things down to Baja. We'd go down to the pavement ended at San Felipe, and we'd take off and head down to Gonzaga Bay. And there was nothing along that coast, along that Gulf Coast. I mean, now I guess I haven't been down there, well, since 92, but there was, now I hear it's just houses. Americans and others have vacation homes. There was nothing. You hit Puertecitos, had a little cantina and hot springs, and then you'd go up through the Seven Sisters if you've been down there over the mountains. Oh yeah. And then down into Gonzaga Bay. Oh, Alfonsinas was down there. But that was a blast. And we used to ride the motorcycles down there at least every summer. We'd go on a 2-week trip and go down there. But I was really into motorcycles. But then I got my license, and I decided I needed a vehicle. My dad had an old 1961 Chevy, well, it wasn't that old then, but a 1961 Chevy Apache 20 two-wheel drive pickup with a 6-cylinder. And it had been his shop truck. So it didn't run. He was gonna just get rid of it. And I go, Dad, I was 15. And I go, Dad, could I buy your truck from you? And then I'll build it over my 15th year. And when I get my license at 16, I'll have a vehicle. He goes, yeah. So he sold it to me. I proceeded to build this truck back, and it had the 6-cylinder. I found an old 348 Chevy V8 with tri-power with the 3 carbs on it. Oh, now, nice. 348 was a smaller, same block, but a smaller version of the 409. You know, she's real fine, my 409. Oh, yes. She was real great, my 348. But I stuck that thing in. I didn't know anything about vehicle work. I mean, I really didn't know what I was getting into. And it took me most of that year. And I finally got it in, and I had 3 on the tree, and the shifting forks were worn out. It was right on the firewall where the shifting forks were. So I remember going on one of my very first dates in my truck. I was so proud. We get on Euclid Avenue, which is a 4-lane with a great big center divider, and Foothill, which was Highway 66, which was another 4-lane. I'm turning left. I get diagonally in the middle of it, and the shifting forks freeze up. It had little bushings that wore out, and if they got out of alignment, it'd freeze up. So we're stopped in the middle, blocking all directions. I had to get out. I opened the hood. I knew what the problem was. I yank up on the forks, get it to shift, get back in, and we go down. So I turned to the girl that I was with. I said, so what do you want to do? She goes, go home. I had grease on my hands and the old truck. So that was my first experience with girls and trucks. But I had this 2-wheel drive. And as I said, I'd go and I'd explore magazines and books about where to go exploring. So now this is a 2-wheel drive, and I'd be out in the desert. Well, what I did was I bought snow chains, and I put them on the rear drive wheel of this truck. And believe it or not, that worked. I'd get through deep sand and I'd drive till I got stuck, and then I'd dig it out, jack it up, put the chains on it, and then off I'd go again with the chains. Pretty low rent. But then I got a Jeep, a 1972 CJ5. It had a 304 in it, and boy, I thought that thing was cool. And those Jeeps weren't the best, you know. I mean, it was pretty nice to have a Jeep. It didn't have a fuse block. It had all inline fuses. The brake lines were routed in the front underneath the grill, and it had a single body mount in the front. And so if you hit a bump wrong, the body would flex onto this hard steel brake line and break it. And so you'd lose your brakes. The clutch had a rod. You may know about the CJ clutch rod. When it wore, it'd drop out. You'd be up. I've had a number of these Jeeps, and this one, it didn't do it because it was still fairly new. It was a used Jeep, but it was fairly new. It was still 1972. And, but I was a musician. I played the stupid clarinet from the time I was in second grade. I hated it. Nobody cool played a clarinet. I wanted to play a guitar, you know, but they made me do it. They made me practice my dad made me practice every day for an hour. By the time I was in high school, I got pretty good, and I got to switch to saxophone. So I didn't have the clarinet.
Now there's a cool instrument.
Yeah, and I played E flat alto. I played tenor. I was in Cal State Honor Band for, I don't know, 4 years, and all Southern California Honor Band for 3 years. And in those, I always played something different. I played contrabass clarinet, alto clarinet. The only thing I never quite got was the flute. I was never good at playing a flute, but oh well. But anyway, so I had music scholarships to San Diego State and to USC, University of Southern California. But they were too close to home, and I wanted to get out. And I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Mormons, you know, and BYU's in Provo. I had no scholarship to BYU, but my parents were always worried about my rebellious nature. I wasn't that bad, but I don't know. I was kind of rebellious. They thought it was great. I would rather go to a church school up north. Well, BYU didn't accept me because my grades were too low. I found out about 5th grade that I didn't have to try at all to get C's. So I quit trying. And if you're younger and watching this, don't do that. You'll regret it. But anyway, so my grades weren't high enough, and they didn't care about my music. So my bishop of my ward in our church and my dad went up to Provo and talked to Dallin Oaks, who was the president of the college, and talked him into interviewing me. So then they had me come up, and I interviewed with him, and he said, fine, you're in. So I got in.
Awesome.
I went to BYU. Well, now from Southern Cal to Provo is what, 600 miles? I don't know. I think I drove about 600 miles, maybe less, but it was a long ways.
600 miles in a whole different world.
Yes, Highway 91, and you were here, you lived here. Highway 91 was the highway. There was a stretch of freeway from St. George to Summit, right past Cedar.
Right.
Then it turned into 2-lane all the way to Beaver. And then you had a little stretch from Beaver to Manderfield. And then it was 2-lane all the way up to Santaquin, which is south of Provo. And you went through all these little towns. You had gotten with semis in front of you, you know, it was something. And I had a CJ with a crappy soft top and a V8 with gas. It was way expensive. It was 32 cents a gallon. But you know what? I couldn't figure, I was going, well, why couldn't I afford to buy gas when gas was 32? And I have an inflation calculator. And I looked it up, and 32 cents then was like almost $3 a gallon today. So no wonder I couldn't afford it. And it was uncomfortable. didn't go fast. So I traded it in on a 1972 Opel Manta Rally, a car. And I put CBA driving lights on it, and it was orange with a black hood. And I got my SCCA competition permit. I joined the sports car club at BYU, and I got my SCCA competition permit and raced that car in showroom stock,
Wow.
which was an SCCA. They'd started that in late 71, early 72. And what you did was you brought your car, you had a roll cage in it and a fire extinguisher. That's all you had to have. You couldn't go up, you could go down one size in tire if you wanted to improve your gear ratio, but I didn't. I didn't have the money anyway. But I raced this thing and I wasn't a very good driver, and I'd win. And so would everybody else who had Opel Mantas. The car was so good and so neutral that didn't much matter who was behind the wheel. It worked. And so they disqualified the car. They finally said that car could no longer be racing in showroom stock. If you do a search for Opel Manta and SCCA, you'll see the story about how it was too competitive, so they knocked it out of the class. Other cars in the class were the Datsun.
510s?
It was before that. 510. Yes.
510.
Yeah, you're right. It had 510, BMW 2002.
Yep, 2002s.
Yeah. And then Volkswagen something. And it was those kind of cars, the little compact car. I love that thing. And I drive it back and forth, and I didn't know how to drive in snow. And so I finally got snow tires on the rear, and I would put all my books in the trunk. And after that, I was able to go. I'd come home one weekend, at least a month, maybe two, from Utah to California. I'd come home on Friday night after going out on a date. I'd get home Saturday morning. I drove through the night, be there the weekend, and I'd go home Sunday night and get there Monday morning in time for school. I don't know how I stayed awake, but I did. So anyway, I had that car, and then when they disqualified it, I was getting the urge to go four-wheeling again anyway. I traded that car in on a Toyota Hilux, we like to call it here, pickup. Now, they didn't make a four-wheel drive then, so once again, here I am with the snow chains on the back, exploring around. And that truck, I kept it for quite a while, especially for me. Before I got rid of it, I would have to take a paper plate, take the air filter off. I had a hole poked in the paper plate, and I'd stick it over the carb and then start the truck, and it acted as a choke. Then I'd pull it off, and my current wife said, "I will never go out with you again if you bring that truck." So it was kind of beat by the time I finished. Then after that, I bought a 74 CJ5, and then drove that a while, then sold that, bought a 75 CJ5. By now it's 1978. I bought a full-size, I had found a Mustang, a 69 Mustang convertible, and an old lady in a trailer park owned it. And it had 30,000 original miles. It had a 351 Cleveland in it from the factory. It had air conditioning, which was also strange for a convertible. I bought that, owned it like 3 weeks, and said, what am I doing with a car? And I talked to Brian Chichua. Brian's on, he was one of the very first, he was one of the movers and shakers who started the Baja 1000 and famous racer. And then he had an accident and hurt his head, and he kind of quit. Well, he did quit racing, although he stayed in our world. In fact, he's the guy who designed the Jeep Scrambler. His idea was what brought the Scrambler to fruition. But anyway, Brian owned a big Jeep dealership in Southern Cal called Chichua Jeep, believe it or not. Anyway, so I was talking to Brian about this Mustang, and that I was stupid again. I want to get another four-wheel drive. And he says, well, why don't you trade me that Mustang for a new full-size, Grand Cherokee Chief that he had sitting there, a brand new one. In 1978, it was white, had that Indian blanket seating in it. I mean, this thing was awesome. Had the wide track Dana 44s, came with a probably power, what do they call those? The power lock, limited slip in the back, Dana's, whatever it was, or it came with that. I go, yeah, I'll trade you. So I traded him and owned that for a year, and I really liked it. And I still kick myself. Of course, now it'd be rusted away to nothing, but I look back, you know how you have those cars that you wish you didn't get rid of?
Oh yeah.
That was one of them. Had a 360, an AMC 360 that I think put out probably 140 horsepower, but it was great. I love that full-size Jeep. And then I would go out exploring. Now I'm back in California now and working. What happened was my dad, there's a number of side stories. You want to hear any of them?
Sure, of course.
My dad owned a tool and die business that became a mold making business, and he made all of the injection molds and dies for General Electric Iron Division, which used to be in Ontario, California. And Dad always wanted me to come in with him in the business. Well, my dad and I had a rocky relationship in my teenage years. Dad was the same personality as me, so we
butted heads. Yep.
Yeah, and I hated working there. But he put me through the mold maker's apprentice program. So every summer and sometimes during school in my junior high and high school years, I was apprenticing at the shop. In fact, you know that little button, if you've seen it on the Black & Decker irons that say up for steam?
Yes.
That was my apprentice project. I had to design the button, draw the blueprints, and build the mold, the very first mold with the cavities in it. And that was mine. And I still, once in a while, I'll see an iron for sale at Home Depot or Lowe's or something, and it'll have my little buttons still on there. GE, of course, took it and took the blueprints and built many more molds and then sold it to Black & Decker, who then took it overseas. But anyway, I was doing that. And you know the Mighty Vac brake bleeder, the
yes.
Yeah, that was a guy named Ted Neward designed that. Ted worked for my dad. And he designed this thing on his own time. And of course, it immediately took off. And Ted got big fast, and he opened his own shop over on Archibald Avenue in Cucamonga. And he offered to my dad, because he knew how much I hated it there. He goes, I'll take your son, let him finish his apprenticeship. You know, he can be a mold maker. And so Dad asked if I wanted to. No, because I wanted out of the whole thing. Plus, by then I was going to college too, and I had other plans. Now, I got drafted in 1972. I got my letter. They were taking the first 100. You know, you received a number, right, and they were taking the first 100, and my number was 11. Oh, so wow. I get this letter, greetings, report to your nearest recruiter. So I went to the ROTC building at the college, and we had Air Force and Army. And Air Force had these girls that were really pretty. They were called Angel Flight. And I go, I want there. So I signed up for ROTC, and because I also was interested in flying, kind of liked everything. And I already knew how to fly. I had gotten a private pilot's license earlier and nothing airplanes, and I never had enough money to fly. But I knew how. And so I thought Air Force was a good fit. I went through college. I majored in communications and broadcasting. I originally wanted to be a forest ranger, but that was when the beginning of the green movement really got going. And it seemed like the USDA Forest Service was kind of one of the epicenters of keep us off the land, you know, protect the forest from the evil people. And I didn't want to be one of those guys. So I was playing in a band and to help make money, playing saxophone, top 40 band. and we'd have gigs on the weekends. And I would do my Air Force thing, do the college thing barely. I mean, once again, barely eked through. I flunked English, by the way, every time. I graduate. This is 1976. Okay. Vietnam is now over. Everybody hates the military, and including Congress. So there's hardly any funding now for pilots or anything. And me being me with my mouth, made lots of friends in the command structure of ROTC, which means I had none. They really didn't like me, which is not their fault, believe me. All my life, I have never learned to put a brake on the mouth. but anyway, my dad always said, he'd been in the Navy in World War II, and he always said, take care of your NCOs. They're the guys who are running the place. And so whenever, Utah had 3.2 beer. And at BYU, the ROTC detachment, the officers were the professors there, the aerospace officers, and they were all members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I guess that's the Air Force thought it was good to assign them. But the NCOs, it was just their assignment, and they weren't Mormon at all. So whenever I'd go home to California, I'd bring back, even though I didn't drink it, I'd bring back real beer, 12 packs, whatever, cases, for the NCOs. Well, when it came time for assignments, when we graduated, I was the only one in the whole detachment that got orders to go to flight school.
Nice.
And I think that was because I took care of the sergeants there, and they were good guys. But anyway, so I went to Williams Air Force Base in Arizona, which is now gone. I mean, it's decommissioned, but went there for a pilot training, and halfway through in those days, they'd see how you did, and then you got to choose if you were in about the top quarter of the class. You got to choose where your training was going to go, and I was there. And so they said you could choose rotary wing, helicopters, transports or bombers, or fighters. Well, I wanted fighters. Heck,
Of course.
I'm not going to fly one of those other things. Afterwards, I kind of think back on that and go, it would have been nice to have learned how to fly a big jet or helicopters. I could have used it later. So I went to fighters and finished up. Well, now it's 1977 and the Air Force is, none of the branches are getting funding. And they came up with a furlough system especially for lieutenants, but there were too many of us and too many pilots. So they said, I had a 6-year commitment after being commissioned. And they said, if you want to get out, go inactive reserve, we'll let you do that. And you won't have to be in the air. I mean, you'll be in the Air Force. I still have my commission, but you don't have to participate, be active. Well, I wanted to fly, but I could see that even that, they were limiting us, fuel and hours. Unless they needed you to do it, you had a hard time getting hours. And I could see the writing on the wall. So I said, okay, I'll take this furlough. So I got out. Well, I have a degree in broadcasting, so I become a DJ at a radio station. I'm playing in the band too, again. Well, I'm seeing, and we're playing in nightclubs now in band, and we're splitting our money. There were 8 people in the band, and I'm going, this disco thing is going now. It's coming up. Saturday Night Fever wasn't out yet, but disco is hot. And I go, and I know how to be a DJ. Why am I splitting 8 ways when I could be the guy? I could be working all by myself. So I was still working at the radio station, but I quit the band, bought DJ equipment, and started doing dances and parties, and didn't know how to mix, beat mix where one's going and the next one comes in and you can't even tell. I was just a DJ. Hey, all right, now we're gonna, it was stupid. I look back now and cringe, but I didn't know any better. So I was this DJ, and then I got a job at a disco and in Provo, Utah. And the other DJ was from New York, and he knew how to beat mix. He goes, hey man, this talking isn't where it's at. And he taught me a couple of songs and just showed me what to do. And then he quit. And so I perfected doing that. And then the mobile stuff, I sold the equipment because now I was working at clubs. Clubs paid way better, and it was steady. I moved to California and moved back to California and started working in some clubs, worked in one in Ontario, California, and then got a better job. Do you remember the drag racer named Gas Ronda?
Yes.
Yeah, he owned a club in West Covina, California. He had started a really great club, and he hired me, and I worked there. And I got in the Southern California DJ Association in Hollywood, and you got all your records. They gave you records every week. I mean, you never bought any records, the 12-inch dance mixes and all. And then just kept getting better jobs. And then I started winning competitions. I got a job at Carlos and Charlie's El Privado on the Strip, and Sunset Strip, Sunset Boulevard, and met, everybody came there, every star. I did parties for them. Alice Cooper was one of the partners in that club, but I did parties for Donna Summer, and you name it. Prince, Prince came in all the time and would sit there and just talk to me, and he didn't drink. He was a great guy. He just was quiet, nothing like the Prince you saw, but I got in a competition spin-off, and this guy came out from New York who had won the year before, won Best DJ, and with Billboard magazine. And we did a spin-off, and I beat him. Next thing I know, I was voted Best DJ in the United States by Billboard magazine. And they had a party for me in Capitol Records, the round building up in the penthouse and all. And it was kind of cool. But after that, it was downhill. I'd already reached what was kind of the pinnacle, and it wasn't that much fun anymore. So we'll pause and go back to the middle of this period, DJing. Air Force gets in touch with me again. We don't have enough pilots now. The military, feast or famine. If you will come back to reserves, we'll promote you to captain. And I go, okay, because I was missing that. I would like to fly. But since I was a reserve, I got F4s, which were being phased out, F4 Phantoms. Right. And foreign powers were buying them, for instance, Germany. And then my buddy who was in the Air Force Academy, he went and got F-15s, and that would have been better. But still, it was okay. So I was in the Air Force Reserves and then flew F-4 Phantoms, mainly teaching the Luftwaffe how to fly our F-4s. And so I did that and got promoted to major. And this is all through the rest of this period, even, up into the mid-'80s, I was in the Air Force. And then I went to a physical checkup. You have to get a checkup with a flight surgeon to make sure you're not dying. Well, she said I was. She said that I had mild right ventricular fibrillation in my heart, and they couldn't allow me to fly. And so then they offered me a desk job, and I said, no, what, I get to come in the reserves and do it once in a while and sit at a desk? So I got out, and I haven't died yet. But anyway, so now I'm a DJ, and I'm really tired of being a DJ. I'm working at these big clubs. I had one night I was working at a club called Studio One in Hollywood, and it stretched a block and a half. It was one big warehouse building, and I'm the DJ hung from the ceiling, and I'm up there playing. I'm doing a mix, and you're concentrating. It's just like playing golf. I mean, you're concentrating on that shot. Someone taps me on the shoulder and I go, get out. And I'm still mixing and he taps me on the shoulder and I go, I'm holding this long beat mix and you're having to drag your finger. This was before the Technics 1200 Mark II came out with a pitch control that you had to drag and speed up the record yourself. So I'm working this thing and this guy keeps bugging me. Finally, I get done with the mix and I turn around and I go, what? Oh, it's Rod Stewart standing there. And he goes, I just cut this acetate, which was what they used to do with vinyl records. They'd do a pressing on acetate to see how it would sound, etc. And he goes, I just did this song. Could you put it on? And we can see how the crowd responds. And there was, I don't know, 2,000 people. I mean, it was wall-to-wall dancers. And I go, I don't know, let me listen. And it was 120 beats a minute, which is where I was. So I go, yeah, I'll put it on. So I mixed into it and the people didn't leave the floor, which is a good sign. And I mixed out of it. I go, yeah, that's pretty good, Rod. And he goes, thank you. And he took it and walked off. It was "Do You Think I'm Sexy," that song.
Wow.
But that happened a lot in the DJ days. But it was fun then, but then it got tiring. And I wanted to do something else. So I'd always look for something. Since I worked at night, I could do something in the day. I became partners in a photo studio in La Quinta, California, down by Palm Springs. And our agency, our business had an agency contact with the Cliff Brown agency, who had all the politicians. They had Gerald Ford, Ronald Reagan. They had Walter Annenberg, the rich guy. They had Bob Hope, Frank Sinatra. So I would get assigned to go out and shoot these guys with a camera. And I'd go out and, we had the PGA, and PGA West was just getting started down there. But real fast, I know we're supposed to be four-wheeling here.
No, it's all, this is very intriguing. Keep going. It's great.
Okay. Well, Ronald Reagan, the very first time I was assigned to take pictures of him, he was speaking at the Eisenhower Medical Center, which had a small auditorium. And this was in Palm Desert. Ron and Nancy would always come down and stay with the Annenbergs, who had a giant estate. He had his own golf course and everything. Well, anyway, so I go in, I have my bag, I have Hasselblad. There's no digital in those days. I have a Hasselblad camera. And I have the Hasselblad in my hand, and I have my bag in the other hand, my camera bag. And Ronald Reagan's speaking from this little podium, and it had about a 2-foot drop to what would be the orchestra pit, but it wasn't. It was just a concrete flat floor up to where the seats started. This was a little auditorium. I come walking in, the Secret Service guy's sitting there. He goes, hey, I go, yeah, hi, I'm going to take pictures. He goes, okay, I got to check your bag. I go, yeah, right. I know I'm not a bomber. I know there's nothing there. And it didn't cross my mind that they were serious. So I go walking out in front of Reagan, kind of bending over. And with the next thing I know, I'm tackled. And the camera goes scooting across the floor. The bag goes the other direction. Ronald Reagan stops his talk. And he goes, are you okay? I go, yes, Mr. President. I retrieved the camera. Luckily, it wasn't broken, and I did my assignment. And I became friends with his Secret Service contingent after that, although they always checked the bag. Yeah. But I was friends with those guys after that. But it was funny. It was funny looking back on it. At the time, it was pretty embarrassing.
But great experiences that you've gotten up to that point. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And it was fun to meet these people. All during this time, I'm four-wheeling. And I'm a member of a club called Saria Al Jamal Jeep Club, which is the Fast Camels.
Okay, Fast Camels.
Yeah, and the Fast Camels had started a Jeep run shortly after World War II. All these guys came back from the war. They bought old flat fenders, and Earl Stanley Gardner, who wrote Perry Mason, he was in the club. I mean, all of these guys, it was really cool. By the time I joined it, Earl Stanley Gardner was dead, and most of the men in the club were headed there. They were very old, a lot of them. Their kids, some of their kids were in it, and most of them weren't that interested. My friend was a guy named Steve Slankard. He owned Indio. His dad owned Indio Speedometer, and his dad and Steve had a falling out. So Steve went and started his own business called Indio Automotive and Electric. Steve knew his stuff. He was very good, and a very good four-wheeler Jeeper. He had a CJ. We all had CJs. I mean, then there wasn't much else. There was Scouts, early Broncos, very few. We'd see in the club, we had one guy with an F-150 short bed, and he was an excellent driver, but that thing was beat because we'd go through these narrow canyons and all, and he just pushed through, or he wouldn't make it and have to go around. But the rest of us had CJs. Steve was a great driver, and his shop was a great place. He used to let me go down and mount tires and balance them, mount my tires and balance them myself. And I really liked it. But Steve then later on committed suicide. So that's sad. I had lost touch with him over the years, and then someone just told me that he's no longer around. It's very sad. He was a good guy, and he was a big mover and shaker in our world down there in the 70s and early 80s. So anyway, I'm in the club. Now also during the 70s, I'd gone out and gone four-wheeling. I'd gotten involved with a little group, not a club, of Dick Seepeck, the Shooks, Gene Shook. We have Tom Smith, we have, which is Seepeck, Rancho, Suspension, and Smittyville. And they went out four-wheeling in the desert. And I went with them a few times. Now, I wasn't like a major member of this group. I just was able to somehow four-wheel with them sometimes. But I knew them, and I got to know the industry a little bit. So I'm still four-wheeling. I become president of the Fast Camel Jeep Club. The run is still going on every year. It happened right after TDS, Tierra del Sol.
Right.
And we made these old guys from the 40s had built trails out there over the mountains in the Orocopia Mountains, which is in between Indio, California and Blythe, California. And there's a little place called Chiricahua Summit, which was a base for Patton in World War II when they did the California Training Center. Right. Well, these guys went south of there, and they had put in these trails. They'd taken some of the old military roads that were there and then added to them up through the mountains. Great trails. And so we would pick every year which ones to use, and we'd have to bring the BLM Rangers out, and they'd approve it. It was a lot of fun, but it got more and more political, as you know, through the 80s. Then the year they were going to pass the California Desert Protection Act, the BLM came and asked the club to GPS all the trail coordinates. First of all, hardly anybody had a GPS. GPS had just come out. Barely had just come out. No, excuse me, they didn't even want, GPS hadn't really come, it was on its way, but they wanted it. Sorry, I'm old. But we had topo maps they gave us, and they said, we want you to go out and mark the routes on all these topo maps, because when this Protection Act comes out, we want to make sure your trails are open. Well, I didn't believe them. And I said, I don't think we should work with them on this. And the rest of the club voted me down. They assigned the rest of the club, even though I was president, big deal. They go, well, Phil, you built that trail. We called it the number 2 trail. And it was in another group of mountains. They go, you give them the map for that, and we'll go out and do our number 1 trail, which was really a cool trail. I go, don't do it. And they go, no, we're going to, and you need to too, because we don't want to make them mad at us. Well, they did, and I didn't. And so when the Protection Act came out, they took every section of land that trail went through, even if it was just a corner, and they closed it. Now my mountains were still open because I didn't give them anything, and it's still open to this day out there. I so much want to go out there and rerun that. I've looked at it on Google Earth and can't hardly find, only the climbs up the hills where they've eroded are still there. You can't see the trail. But anyway, so led the last fast camel was 1990, and I led that, and that was right before the Protection Act happened. I don't know when exactly, but it was in those years. We ran the fast camel cruise. We had a ton of people from all over, and then that was the last one. The club died out. The men, the older men all passed away, and the kids of those guys weren't interested anymore, pretty much. But the club include, Bill Bryan. He's in the Off-Road Motorsports Hall of Fame. He was an old racer. There was a lot of guys in that, and I counted a privilege to know them and to pick up tips while I was learning how to drive off-road well from these old guys. I remember I had a Detroit locker in the back in one of my 70s Jeeps, Detroit locker and a power lock in the front, because who'd put a Detroit in the front? You couldn't steer, I was told. So then all these old men would get out and they'd crawl these hills. Our big thing was how elegant you could climb hills and how slow you could go without spinning tires. And they'd crawl. I think I do pretty well, but my front would spin, and these guys would just crawl up. And I go, how are you doing it? They go, we have Detroits front and rear. I go, well, you can't steer. And they go, yes, you can. So I started putting Detroits front and rear in my vehicles, and sure enough, yes, you could steer. And it was great. In fact, you could learn a little throttle. To this day, I can't tell you how to do it, but throttle feathering with a Detroit, when you crank the wheel, it'll actually pull you around. I can't explain how it is. It's just seat of the pants type thing. But all this stuff you learn from these old guys. I learned. I had become a director of entertainment for Marriott Hotels for the region. I hired the DJs and the bands. Really didn't like it, except it left me free to go four-wheeling at times, which I liked. I quit there and started a Jeep tour company in Palm Springs. Only I was using her 88 Broncos, 1988. I'd borrowed the money and bought, 5 or 6 Broncos, and we built seats in the back and a roll cage, took that back half off of the top. And then these companies, we do the destination management people, they have conventions, and they'd hire us they go, we need 104 seats. And then they pay us for that. So I didn't have enough seats. So I bought a couple old Jeep Scramblers and put seats in them. And then my manager called me one day and said, we had a fist fight. And I go, what? He goes, yeah, people were fighting to get in one of those Scramblers. No one wanted in the Bronco. So I had my drivers poll everybody, and they all wanted to ride a Jeep. Forget the Broncos, even though the Broncos were more comfortable. So I sold them all, bought a bunch of Scramblers. We worked for about a year, and then I sold out to my competition, because you had to rely on the BLM every year for your permitting. And you never knew if you were going to be working next year or not. And I didn't like that. So I sold it to my competition and was doing nothing. Well, I'd been friends with John Curry, was one of my buddies. We'd met in the early 80s, maybe 83, 84. And he was my four-wheeling buddy. John and I we'd go out in the desert, we'd meet and go four-wheeling, and he had a number of different vehicles. One of my favorites, he had built a CJ7 with a 454 Chevy in it. And that thing was clean and nice. And we were running 33s and thought that was pretty cool, because, back earlier we were running like 10, 15 Armstrong True Tracks, and before that, farm implement tires that were smooth with the grooves in them. But boy, when 33s came out, and that was nice, big tires. And one time we were going to do a run out at Shereko Summit, and John meets us out there and walks in the cafe. We were having breakfast, and he goes, look what I did to my Jeep. And it was this 454 CJ. And it's probably 87 because the YJ had come out. I go out and I go, whoa, what size are those tires? And they have 35s. I had 35-inch BFG mud trains. I go, how did you fit those on? He goes, oh, that new YJ Wrangler came out with the flares that have room to trim in the back. And he put those on and trimmed it. So I immediately went home, got some YJ flares and put 35s on my CJ. And then that was something to have 35s. We were four-wheeling all the time. And during my time as Jeep, when I had the Jeep Tour company, I had bought a salvage CJ7. I had got Curry 9 inches front and rear. Now, I wasn't at the magazine or anything. And so all this stuff was paid for with actual money. I drove that Jeep to Moab. Now, I was also in the Red Rock four-wheelers. I'd gone up in about 82 and met Dan Mick, who had just moved there, like I think in 79, 80. And he was the president of the Red Rocks. Now, they hadn't done anything from like the late 60s. They kind of had a town run on Easter, but the club wasn't that active until George Schultz, the senior,
Yes.
and Dan had gotten together and they got the club going again. And in fact, Dan got hold of George's CJ7 and painted it up. And that was Dan's Jeep at the time I met him. Excuse me. No, he had a K5 Blazer when I first met him. That wasn't locked up. And, here I come from the California desert with all these guys. And he took me over to Potato Salad Hill. And she was going to show me Hell's Revenge. I'd never seen it, never been to it. He goes, go up that. And I look and I go, okay, Potato Salad Hill. He goes, well, I'm going to go around and sit on top. I want to get some pictures. So he goes around and I get tired of waiting for him. So I drive up the hill. No big deal. I have lockers front and rear. And I get to the top. Dan goes, you damn guys with lockers. But anyway, I've been coming off and on to Moab since 72 when we went down there to get Christmas trees for a thing I was in college up at the Y. We had gone down to cut Christmas trees to sell them and discovered that. So I've been going there too and off and on, but I didn't know any of these trails that the club had. So Dan took me out, showed me these different trails. About 80, I don't know what year I started leading the Behind the Rocks trail. But I did in the mid 80s and led it up until about 1990 or so. Phil Smith, a doctor in Cedar City, was my tail gunner for all those years. And he took it over when I quit and led Behind the Rocks after that for a number of years. I really enjoyed it in those days. I mean, Easter Jeep Safari, no corporate presence at all. It was a bunch of guys four-wheeling. We had where Eddie McStiff's is in Moab. That was a barn. And we used to just meet at the barn and say, okay, I'm going to go to Moab Rim or I'm going to go to Hell's Revenge. And who wants to go? And you raise your hand. The people would raise hands and then we'd take them out and lead them. Only Big Saturday you would sign up for. But the rest of the week, you just went and it was fun. Then the barn got sold. Moab started getting popular. And this is in the 80s now. The magazines weren't paying a lot of attention to us, to our four-wheeling, our exploring, family club, backcountry type stuff. It was getting more chrome shocks, bikini girls standing in the back of pickups. Off-road, Rick Simons, he was still doing real four-wheeling in off-road magazine, but by and large, nobody else was. So we weren't getting any coverage and it didn't matter to us. We didn't know we needed coverage. It was a lot of fun, four-wheeling in those days. Well, it gets to be 1990. I go into the driver's meeting on Easter Jeep Safari. I'm leading Behind the Rocks, which by the way, Gary Moulton, a member of the club who lived in Moab, the first year I did Behind the Rocks, I go, hey, Gary, I'm not sure I know every turn. Can you take me out there and I'll just put little surveyor's tape at the turns so I can lead people? He goes, yeah. So he took me out there and we went out, ran behind the rocks. We get to Potato Salad, or oh, for heaven's sakes, the big main obstacle on Behind the Rocks.
White Knuckle?
White Knuckle Hill.
Right.
We go down it, come back up, fool around. And then he goes, now the trail goes out here to the county road. And then we go over to Pritchett and go down Pritchett. I go, okay. He goes, but there's another way I can show you. And we turn right at the bottom of the hill. So I go, yeah, let's look at that. It was down Hunter Canyon. Now there wasn't even a road down Hunter Canyon. We just kind of trail broke through the reeds and the rushes through the canyon, up on a little shelf under an overhang, and got that. And I thought it was nice. And so I added that into the Behind the Rocks trail. I just started leading the trail that way. Yeah, it always cracked me up that years later, I was coming up Pritchett and I get to the top and here's a sign at Hunter Canyon Behind the Rocks Trail. And I go, ha! All right. but anyway, 90 came around, had the driver's meeting. There were some people that were really tree huggers. They were Jeepers, but very environmentally conscious. And I wasn't then, I am more now, but I still don't think they were right. They wanted to keep us off of everything. Well, they had the driver's meeting and they said, okay, now you have to take this porta potty with bags. And if anybody has to go, you let them go in this and then you carry the bags out. I go, what? Don't let them carry the bag? Oh, no, we have to make sure the bags don't get put anywhere. You have to carry them out. And I said, yeah, right. And then they have another guy get up, the land use guy, and he says, okay, now our trails and the dirt road sections are getting wider and wider. So we not only want you to stay on the trails, but we need you to stay in the center of the trails. And if you see anybody pulling to the side of a trail, you have to run up and tell them to move back. Well, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And I just said, I'm not doing it. So Phil was sitting up a few rows ahead of me, Phil Smith, and I walked up. I go, do you want to lead this thing instead of me? He goes, well, yeah. So I go, okay, goodbye. And I quit. And I quit the club. And now that is not the Red Rock four-wheelers of today. They are great, and the people are involved and they're into the sport. And so this was just a few people in leadership back at that one little period. So please don't get me wrong. I'm not anti-Red Rock. So now I'm just coming to Moab and it gets, well, in fact, I went to that year, I was at Safari and Warren had a run, Warren Winch, not like they do now, but this one was just some friends they put together. And Tom McMullen, who was McMullen Publishing, who had some magazines, and his wife Deanna were there. And they were really good friends with Frank Curry. So I knew Tom from the 80s. And Tom comes up, hey, Phil, you gonna go on this Warren run? I go, yeah. You got an extra seat? And I said, yeah, I'm by myself. He said, well, will you take Deanna? I go, yeah. He goes, yeah, I want to take some important people from Warren. So I go, okay. So Deanna gets in, we run Hell's Revenge, and she's questioning me about my wife, my family, about my life. And I go, well, stop. What do you care? And then, but I answered her, and then that was it. It was fun. We had our, the run and went home. 2 weeks later, Tom calls, hey, how would you like to be the editor of my, of a four-wheel drive magazine? And I go, well, Tom, I don't know. I flunked English. Every time I took it, I flunked it because I didn't listen. He goes, oh, we don't care about that. We want enthusiasts. We hire journalist majors, English majors, and they don't know anything about it, that the enthusiasts can see right through that. He goes, you had that photo studio. I know you can take pictures. We can fix your writing. Do you want to try it? I go, well, I would like to, but I'm scared. And he goes, listen, we have a magazine we're killing. So if you don't do well, it's going to get killed anyway. And And I go, okay, I'll try it. And then a word on that, what happened was, as I said, most of the magazine, except Off-Road, and I believe by then Rick Simons was gone. So all of the magazines were doing chrome roll bars, flags in the back, bikini girls standing in there. And McMullen had a magazine called Four Wheel Drive Action. And it had started out pretty good. And then he started telling the editor what they had to run, the editors. And he went through a number of different editors. And Tom liked women in his magazine. He loved them. In fact, right before I started, they had a picture of two girls in bikinis all soaked up with a tool chest and a Jeep, and they were washing it. No one cared about the Jeep. It was just the girls. And they didn't have any advertising anymore. In fact, the only advertising in the magazine were carryovers. Like they said, if you buy this 12-month full-page 4-color ad in Truckin' magazine, we'll put you for free in four-wheel drive action. I think they changed it by then to four-wheel drive SUV or something. And so there was no advertising, and they were going to kill it. And so I came in and I said, well, Tom, if you want me to be the editor, these bikini girls have got to go. No. I go, yeah, Tom, we're going to do real four-wheeling in this magazine. Well, I don't know. Well, Ken Yee, who was Tom's partner, calls me up and he goes, Phil, you got to understand, the girls are wonderful. They 5,000 more readers every time girl on cover. Ken was from China or Hong Kong or Taiwan or somewhere. And he was a good guy and he was a smart guy too. But I didn't agree with him on this. I go, I don't care. If you want me to be the editor, I don't want these, unless they're driving the Jeep, I don't want them just gratuitously. This isn't, put on the cover. This is not Sports Illustrated. It's certainly not Penthouse. And then Tom talked Ken into letting it happen. And I started out and I wrote my first editorial that said we were changing the focus of the magazine to real four-wheeling, to family, club, and just backcountry exploring. And that probably wouldn't be going to events because everybody else would cover events, and we just want to give you trail riding and rock crawling and whatever, which was not rock crawling that was 10 years later. The very first, it came out, the first issue, and I changed the name to Four Wheel Drive and Sport Utility magazine. Tom said there had to be a sport utility in there because they were so big. I changed the logo. I did the logo. I designed it. The very first magazine came out and the ads started coming in. The marketing girl for Warren was a woman, and she said, I was so glad to see this, that you're going to support women as long as they're doing what you're doing. But she goes, I refuse to do it with the bikini girls and things. So they bought full page ad. All these other people came in and said, wow, no one's doing this. Well, Tom told me that it'd probably take a year to be profitable and for any and he'd started many magazines. Well, we were profitable within 6 months, and nice. We were never giant like Four Wheel and Off-Road or Four Wheeler, but we were a good niche publication for that family, club, and backcountry four-wheeling. So that's what we covered. I had some good guys. First, it was only me, and there's a number of names like Alan Phillips wrote for me. Well, my name is Philip Allen Howell. So Alan Phillips was me. And there was a number of different nom de plumes, that when it was really only me. I didn't have a buyout for freelancing. Once in a while, David Freiberger would write for me. He was not at the magazines yet, but he was a freelancer. Everything David does turns to gold. I mean, he's awesome. But really, hardly anybody wrote. No one wrote for me. And then they gave me a buyout as things got better, and I hired Mark Workmeister. I don't know if you remember him. Jake Kopinski, all good guys. Then they let me hire Trent, Trent Riddle. Now Trent had he was building a dual battery system, and I had done a story on his dual battery system, and got to talking with him, and I go, this guy would be good, for hiring to be an associate editor. And they finally gave the okay, and I did. And of course, Trent was great. And later on, Kevin McNulty came on board, and he was great. People like to say that we had competition because we weren't all the same company back then. In fact, John Stewart, who was the editor of Four Wheeler at the time, now he's a vice president at SEMA, but he came up to me at the first SEMA after our issues had started coming out. And he came up to me and said, Phil, we applaud what you're doing, but you'll never make it. No one will advertise in this magazine. You have to do parts installs. You have to show stuff that you've quit showing, the chrome, and the people like it. He goes, but it won't happen. But we do applaud your efforts. 2 years later, he came up to me and said, wow, do I have to eat my words? Because by then they had started doing trail riding and all. And of course, Payway wasn't there then at Four Wheel and or at JP. Remember when he first got hired, they hired him for JP. And none of those guys were there. Rick it was, I think he owned a business called Republic Off-Road in Phoenix. If he didn't own it, he managed it. But all of us, it's like we got along. Even though we were competitors, people would say, oh yeah, those guys said this or that. And no, they didn't. We all, I can't think of anybody in our industry that while I worked there who was bad, who was a jerk. Every one of them had their own area of expertise. Rick, you give him a flat fender in pieces, every single piece, he'd have it built probably within a week. Maybe not, but I mean, he liked, one time we were four-wheeling and Rick turned around and I go, what happened? Oh, it was up El Dorado. Yeah, and I go, what happened, Rick? The trail get too hard for you? He goes, no, my frame broke in half. Which it did on his flat fender. It broke in half, and Ned Bacon and him had gone back to town. They somehow got him back to town. But I asked him, because he was quite happy about the whole thing. I go, do you like working on this stuff more than you like driving up these trails? And he goes, well, you said it, not me. But I think he enjoys working on things like that. Me, I'd rather be driving. I can work on it, but through most of my tenure at the magazine, I would get a shop to like John Bundrant at All Pro for the Toyotas, a number of different Jeep places. Of course, Curry. It was funny, and when the YJ came out, the fuel-injected YJ in '91, that 4-liter was nice, but I wanted to put a Chevy Corvette engine in the YJ, an LT1. I asked John Curry if we could use Curry Enterprises because they had hoists and nice shop. And he goes, no. I go, really? He goes, yeah, if you want to get me an LT1 also, and I can build my YJ, he goes, I'll let you use the shop. So I said, I don't know, I'll ask GM. So I called up GM and they said, yeah, we'll do that. We'll give you 2 complete drivetrains, the LT1 and a 4L, I think it was a 4L60 back then, automatic. They sent one of their engineers, Mark McPhail, out to oversee the project. So John did 2/3 of the work on my Jeep first, while I took pictures and wrote about it. I did some of the work, but John was 2/3. Mark McPhail was probably another quarter, maybe, I don't know. And I was the rest. That Jeep turned out perfect. I mean, and it was like GM did it. And then John got his done with Mark McPhail's help. Now remember, GM engineer, he got everything working, including the VATs and, the vehicle anti-theft system wouldn't let it run. So he reprogrammed it. It was just like a Corvette. only it was in a Jeep. So I took it to the California Air Resources Board referee. And now I'd already called them before we started the project to make sure that it would be okay to do this. And they said, oh yeah, as long as you have all the smog equipment on it. I go, okay. So we take it to the referee, comes out. He goes, your Jeep put out 1/10 what we allow. He goes, that is a clean Jeep. I go, fantastic. He goes, but we can't approve it. I go, what? He goes, no, this year Corvette engine, Chevy brought the Corvette LT1 into California on a waiver. And because they did that, we can't allow that engine to go into anything else in California. I go, what? Well, I have this expensive Jeep. Now I can't register it. So John goes, I'll try it. So John takes his into the referee, another referee, and same thing. And then we get called by California and say, okay, now there are 2 Jeeps here that looked identical, different VIN numbers, but we want you to know they're in our system. And if you try to register them again in California, we will impound them. And okay, so I put mine up for sale and I sell it to a guy comes from Fresno, California. And I tell him, I go, you can't register this. He goes, that's okay. I have a home in Reno too. I go, okay, well, register it in Nevada, not California. About a month later, here comes a knock on my front door. I open the door, here's a highway patrolman. And he's with a guy with another highway patrolman, but in a jumpsuit, a blue jumpsuit. And I look outside and there's a truck with a trailer on it. And I go, hello. He goes, you asked who I was. And who told him? He goes, yes, okay. You tried to register your vehicle again, a 1991 YJ Jeep Wrangler. And we're here to impound that vehicle. I go, oh, I sold that vehicle. I showed him the bill. I had a copy of the paperwork. And I go, but the guy said he was in Nevada. He lived in Nevada. He goes, well, the attempt was made, let's see, in Central California. I go, well, it wasn't me. And can you give me the guy's information there? Well, I couldn't tell him I didn't have it because I just showed him. So I gave him the information. Then I got a hold of the guy. I go, you better get that Jeep out of the state. And why did you try to register it? He goes, well, I was pretty sure that I'm in Central California. You were in Southern. So I go, well, they're coming to get it. So off he goes. And they never did catch him. He did finally register it in Nevada. But some of these Air Resources Board things, Utah's a lot better on that. Anyway, then rock crawling. We get up through the years at the magazine, and in 1992, I was talking to Bob Hazel. Now, Bob Hazel had a company called Sports in the Rough, and I know you know Bob.
Right.
And they did all kinds of different adventure stuff with 4-wheel drives and other things, and Iron Man stuff. And I was telling Bob about this idea I had on trials for 4x4s. And he's, wow, that's cool. And this is 92. I believe we were in Moab, and I was talking to him at a car wash. But anyway, so that was it. Well, 1997 rolls around, 98. Bob calls me. He goes, remember that thing you were talking to me about that motorcycle trial, the 4x4 trials? I go, yeah. He goes, you want to do that? And I go, well, yeah. He goes, yeah, I'll use Sports in the Rough, and because I already have the company. He goes, and we'll do this. We'll partner. So I go, okay. So Bob didn't have much idea on how to do it. So I got to thinking and worked out a scoring system and how it would work and all. And we decided, Bob lived in the Carolinas somewhere, and I lived in California. So I go, let's do it in Las Cruces, New Mexico. That's in the center. So we went there, and the club there was very helpful and showed us a couple of canyons, and I chose this canyon to run, and me and the Currys went out and we set up the course. And Bob did kind of paperwork with the sponsors and all. He was doing that. I was doing the course layout, and then we had a great turnout that first year. were you there? I think you might
No,
have.
no, I
Oh,
didn't. I didn't. I made it to the one in Johnson Valley. Was the first rock
okay.
crawl I went to.
That was the second one. I'll tell you about that in a minute. So we had that. It worked great. You know, everything worked well except one thing. Bob thought that all the participants should not have any stickers on their vehicles, that we had to require all the vehicles, all the participants to use the event sponsor stickers on the vehicles. Well, I told him, well, I don't agree with this because these guys, a lot of them have got parts for the exposure. And like, you know, ARB isn't going to get much exposure if they're in somebody's diff. You know, they need to have it on the vehicle. That's why they gave the parts to these guys in exchange for the marketing exposure. No. And we talked about it, and Bob said, okay, we'll go ahead and not require them to take their stickers off. Well, at the event, at registration, they were required to take off their stickers. I didn't agree with Bob on that. And after the event, we had decided to go to Johnson Valley for the next one, which was right by where I lived. And I got the permit and had the permit in hand. And then I talked to Bob. I go, now, Bob, what about this sponsorship deal? We still need to get by that. And he goes, I really feel strongly I need to support the event sponsors, which was a true thing. I go, well, yeah, but we need to let them have, you know, their own stickers on there too, the competitors. And he said, no, because what if they compete against our event sponsors? For instance, BF Goodrich was a sponsor, you know, the main sponsor, and somebody's running Toyo. You know, Bob didn't feel like it was right for them to have the stickers on. So I go, well, we need to agree to disagree and we'll split up. Well, Bob got quite angry at me, as did all his buddies in the industry. And I felt kind of bad. I mean, this was just two different opinions. It wasn't that one guy was bad and the other guy was good. You know, it was two different opinions. So I told Bob, listen, you can have Johnson Valley. I'll give you the permit and you can just continue with that. And I will go somewhere else. Well, I had friends in Farmington. We'd been four-wheeling there forever. And Jim Peterson and Phil Collard. So I go over there and I talk to Phil. And I go, you want to help me lay out a rock crawl competition here? Yeah, sure. So we did. We laid out the competition there together. Phil was great. And then I found out from a friend that there were a couple other friends of mine who were thinking of starting another competitive rock crawling series. Well, I had been just breaking even on this thing, and I had Goodyear had said they were going to be the name sponsor, but they never sent the check. And so I was like, oh, I'd rather be four-wheeling than running this competition. So I called up Ranch Pratt, who was starting was thinking about starting another event. And I asked if he was interested in just taking mine over, and he said, yeah. So that happened. That became the ARCA series. You know, the rest is history on that. And Phil, I think, stayed with them and helped them lay out courses all throughout the West. And I kind of backed out of it then. I see that my scoring system is still used in places, but
the only place it's really, I mean, besides Jesse Haynes putting on Supercrawl now, I'm the only one really doing, you know, a national series, and I'm still doing an East-West and a national championship event. And then there's a small series up in the Northeast, and then once in a while the Idaho X Rocks does a series, but otherwise it's We Rock is the only one that's still going.
Well, it was exciting, but I went back to my roots of four-wheeling and I mean, it's still in the magazine, you know, we're doing four-wheel drive. And then in 2004, they came to me and said, we want you to leave four-wheel drive and go to Off-Road magazine. and see if you can bring off-road. Off-road wasn't doing bad. It wasn't dirt sports yet, but it just was kind of level, and they wanted to see the numbers come up. I went there and I didn't do any better than any other editor who was there. It didn't go down, it didn't go up, but I had kind of turned it from racing. I went back to trail riding with trucks and Jeeps and whatever. And I remember at SEMA in 2006, I went and ran into some industry people and, hey, Phil, what are you doing now? I go, I'm the editor of Off-Road Magazine. Oh, wow. Oh, we don't read that one. I go, thanks. So anyway, but it didn't work out. But I was still there. And then they called me and said, we'd like you to go back to four-wheel drive and sport utility. And if you don't want to, you're fired. And I go, no, I want to. I want to go back there. So, and they put, was it Mike Finnegan? I can't remember who they put in as Jared Jones, I think. They put him in as editor there, and of course did a great job. Went back to the racing and other things that they covered. And then when they bought Dirt Sports, they rolled it together. And of course, whatever happened to it after the big bloodletting, I don't know. But those guys did a great job. But I'm back at four wheel drive and was there until 2014. And I did lots of projects. I can't even remember all the project vehicles I've owned. And that was one thing when we first started doing this. I'm not rich, and you are.
Only in name and personality.
but anyway, I couldn't afford to buy these vehicles without the money from the vehicle before. And my magazine wasn't big enough. You know, a lot of the bigger magazines would get dollar vehicles from Ford or Jeep or Chevy, whatever. Toyota, they'd give them dollar vehicles to build up, and then they had to write about them for a period of time in the magazine. Well, I didn't get any of those. So I would get these projects done, and then to do the next one, I'd sell them. And I remember John came to me, John Curry goes, you know, we supply your axles a lot, but we're kind of mad. You sell these vehicles the minute you get them done. I go, yeah, and I explained I can't afford to do the next one. And the magazine doesn't buy the projects, it's me. Oh, okay. And they were okay with that. And I remember Tom Wood came to me, Tom Wood's Custom Drive Shaft. And he had worked for 6 states. He was working for 6 states here in Utah doing the same thing, building drive shaft. And Tom was trying to figure out whether he should go on his own, but it's hard to give up a paycheck and benefits. And I told him, if you go on your own, I will write about you all the time, because I loved his drive shafts. I mean, he had participated, and he did. And of course, that's history too. We wrote about him, and he became giant. And but Tom once came to me. He goes, you know, what about this? I build you drive shafts, and then you sell the vehicle. And after we get the magazine coverage, and I go, well, here's the deal. Tom told him I couldn't afford to do the next one without selling it. I go, so here's what I can do. You can build me 1 set of drive shafts, and I'll promise you I won't sell this vehicle, but you'll get no more press for any more projects because I can't afford them. Or I can build it, sell it, and then get the next one, and we'll do it again. Yeah, that's what I'd rather have. So that's why I always had so many different vehicles. I was always trying to finance the next project. Although now that I'm semi-retired, things haven't changed that much. I have a new Ford Ranger right now that I'm building to appear in Four Wheeler magazine.
Nice.
Yeah, it is. It's fun, but I've gone back to kind of exploring. I love to go out and where does that road go, and go on it and see where it goes. Find a ghost town, find, you know, ruins, find beautiful scenery. I mean, that's what drives me now. And I like to write about it still, although the venues are less, you know, there isn't as many places now, but to write about that stuff.
Especially in print.
Yeah, in print, excuse me. Yeah.
And there is still a market for print. Crawl magazine, our magazine for low, they're more niche magazines, you might say, but they don't have all that corporate overhead that killed the other magazines.
Overhead is a nice word for it. And since it's a family show, we won't say what it really is. They killed them. I mean, they killed the magazines. You look at what John Herrick has done with Crawl and with Trails, and you've done For Low and all, and they're fantastic looking. They have good paper, good photography, good writing. It really is good, and people still want them.
Yes.
But like my company just kept cutting it, and the upper management knew nothing about what we were doing, and they themselves thought print was dead. They started making the paper so thin that the 4-page full color ads, when they printed it, the paper would crinkle because it would get wet from the ink. It was so thin. You know, Discovery Media bought the company. They kept Four Wheeler and Hot Rod and one other. Hot Rod, Four Wheeler, and for Motor Trend, of course.
Yes.
I think it's the Motor Trend group. But and Ken Brubaker's still at Four Wheeler, still doing a good job. They need better paper. I found a Four Wheeler on the stand. I have a story in the latest Four Wheeler on a Jeep I built, and I went to find one, barely. It's so thin. Yours and John's magazines look so good. And I want to thank you for that too, for keeping that going.
I appreciate it. I really appreciate that. When we decided to purchase For Low, it was a new magazine. It was at issue 17, was a combined with the old owner and us, but he had only started printing, I think, with issue 13. But it was such a small print run that he had really no marketing, no magazine, no advertisers,
Right.
And not very many subscribers. I think 100 or less. We took it and I knew what I wanted. And luckily my wife Shelley's a great editor. And my background in college was commercial photography. So we just kind of combined our skills, but being in the industry so long as an event promoter and being all over the place, so many people have just jumped on board and become contributors that it's allowed us to grow the magazine slowly, but still put out a quality product and not have any overhead. The only overhead is the printing and the distribution, and the distribution is all by subscription, or we hand them out free.
Yeah.
So the marketing partners are still getting, our advertisers are still getting the magazine run out that they want, the coverage. Right. So it's guerrilla marketing at its finest.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. I guess that's about it. Well, we're way over time.
No, we're not over time. Okay. There is nothing called overtime.
Okay. It's funny. I like to think I was kind of a mover and shaker in the industry. I feel like I brought trail riding back in the magazines, and of course everybody else jumped on it, and some did it better, after me. But I feel like I at least steered the ship so it was heading back that way. And then the rock crawling thing, and which very few people remember. I read a lot of articles about rock crawling, and they talk about this guy started it. Well, I didn't see any of them around.
No, I'm the one that knew.
Yeah, that's right. You were the one. You always mention that, and I appreciate it. But there's so many others. I mean, so many other unsung people, or people who are not known as well. I mean, Frank Curry, holy cow. I mean, what an awesome man. And he did so much behind the scenes to help the sport come forward. And then his boys, I didn't know, we all have to learn stuff as we go along. That one CJ7 I built and drove it to Moab from California and back without a top on. I loved that trip. But it wandered all over the road. And I knew enough. I knew how to undo the lock nut on the Saginaw box and adjust it a little tighter. And I did that. It got worse. I'm wandering all over. And south of Vegas, the semis had put ruts in the road, in the highway. And I'd hit those ruts and be, oh, and I don't know what's wrong with this thing. It's wandering. And I drove it back down to Curry's one day for lunch. And Ray Curry looks under the vehicle and goes, man, this thing must wander all over the place. I go, it does. How do you know? He goes, look at the caster. And it turned out I didn't have any positive caster in it. And of course, those were leaf spring days. So actually, I paid Curry to cut the C's off and rotate them back. And I got a little caster. And it was cured. And then I knew about caster after that. But it's funny how in our earlier days, how we had to learn this stuff. But Ray took one look when I just sweated over it and just hated it. You know, why, this thing must wander all over the place. And then John, of course, John Curry, he is a wonderful driver. We competed against each other, you know, just friendly when we're out on runs. All the time. We like to crawl the obstacles, and then we'd like to race as fast as we could go in between. And you know, he's such a good driver. Gerald Lee, you know Gerald?
Oh yeah.
I mean, Gerald, what a great guy.
Absolutely.
All these industry guys. Tony at Genrite. I remember he called me. I was living in Hurricane, and he called me up and he said, hey, Phil, and he introduced himself. He goes, I have this gas tank that I'm making for Jeeps. He goes, and I can't get anybody to talk to me at any of the magazines. And I'm coming through and can I stop by your house and show you this tank? I go, yeah, sure. Yeah, well, what can it hurt? Well, he brought this beautiful stainless tank. It was, he was calling it the EXT. Extended range tank, and it was beautiful, and it would bolt right in. And so I go, I have to take pictures of this. So I took pictures and did a little product review on it in the magazine. But he said he couldn't get anybody else to listen to him. So I called the guys at the other magazines and said, you got to look at this thing. This is great. It was wonderful to be able to help him get going. You know, John Bundran at All Pro, what a great guy. Absolutely. And then he got in with Nelson and they built Tiny. And that was, what an awesome buggy, that thing. I still think it is. I mean,
it is. I see it every year. It comes up and competes in Texas.
Oh, does it?
Yes.
Okay, it's in Mexico?
It comes up from Mexico, from Toledo, however they say it. And they come up and compete with us every March.
Cool.
Yep.
And then, I mean, you know, the problem with naming names is you forget someone and they get upset, but I can't think of one guy or girl in the sport that I can't think anything negative about them. Even the guys who we had our differences, you know, I can't think of anything bad about them. They were great in their own way, and they helped our sport so much. Rod Hall, which I can't say anything bad about at all, but do you remember that I had gotten in with AM General back in the early 90s when they first brought the H1 out, the Hummer? They came to Moab, and I was still leading behind the rocks, not on Big Saturday because Phil had taken that, but I was leading it during the week. And I took these H1s out with Jim Armour, the president. He was trying to get up some hills, and Jim was a pretty good driver, and he would do it. And then he'd have his corporate driver try it, and he'd spin out and not do it. And so he goes, Phil, do you want to try it? And I go, yeah. And I lucked out, went right up White Knuckle Hill. And without even trying, he goes, oh, I want you to be driving one of these. So they started giving me a Hummer every year. I'd get it for a year, and then they'd replace it with another one. But when they were courting Rod Hall to race for him, I got a call and said, Phil, would you like to come with us to Baja with Rod Hall? He wants to go and try out the H1s down there. Yeah. So down we went, And I'd gotten pretty cocky by then. I thought I was pretty hot. I was a good driver. I mean, John Curry was a good driver, and me and him were 50-50. You know, I was good. And I said, if I got the same vehicle as these racers, they don't have a chance. You know, well, we go down there and they give me an H1, Rod an H1, and then they had some engineers and their corporate drivers and a couple other ones. You know, we take off on the Baja 500 race course for that year. And within minutes, we've left the AM General guys. I mean, they're way back. But Rod is in front of me. And I'm driving as hard as I can, using all the skill. Now, these Hummers weren't very fast. They had 6.2 diesels. But I'm driving as hard as I can, and there's Rod's dust. Within 10 minutes, all I can see is his dust. And I'm driving as hard as I can. And I mean ahead of me. And so in 20 minutes, we had little radios. He's out of radio range. And I'm driving as hard as I can. So all of a sudden I go, you have to rethink your abilities, Phil. I wasn't as hot as I thought I was. But we get to right before Mike's Sky Ranch on the east side, you know, it's all rocky and kind of to climb up to the last climb there to the ranch. Here's Rod beetled on a rock. He'd high centered and his every time he'd stick it in gear, he'd go forward, he'd turn one way and he'd put it in reverse and he'd pivot the other way. So I kind of knew rock crawling all right, you know, and so I just crawl right by him and get to Mike's Sky Ranch before he did. Now remember, he had been so far away from me, so far ahead of me that he was out of radio range. So just because I kind of knew how to pick a line maybe a little better in that one section. Well, they come up to me at lunch and said, Phil, we can't have you drive that Hummer. Oh, what? You know, no, Rod's really mad that you came into Mike's Sky Ranch before him. And I go, he was killing me. He was miles ahead of me. Getting hung up a little bit doesn't count. He is way better driver. He has no reason to be mad. And they go, well, he's a little upset. So we're going to have you get in the passenger seat. We're going to have one of our drivers drive you afterwards, after lunch. Okay, so we get in the Hummers after lunch and the road down to, from Mike's Sky Ranch down to the Pacific side. There's a little town down there. I can't remember its name, but it's graded. It's really nice. Right. But it's cut into the side of the mountain and there's cliffs. So Rod takes off as usual. Well, this guy, the corporate driver, thinks he's like me. He thought he was as good as Rod Hall, which was not true in either of our cases. But he's trying to keep up with Rod. Well, once again, Rod's gone. I mean, we come around a few corners and you can't even see his dust anymore on the road. He's so far ahead. But this guy's trying to keep up. And I'm getting a little worried because there's a big cliff on the side of the road. And this guy's going as fast as he can. And then I think, well, don't worry about it. He doesn't want to die either. But then we get to this one big sweeping corner and the Hummer starts to slide and broad drift. And I go, oh no. So he floors it, but it's a 6.2 liter diesel with no horsepower. So he doesn't have anything to pull out. So I go, this thing's going over and this heavy toad's gonna crush us in here. So I put my hands under my legs and I laid on the center, that giant motor cover center console. And I lay down on that. And sure enough, we go off. And the first about 10 feet is vertical. And then it hits a hill that's probably about like this. I mean, and so we fly off. When we hit that hill part, starts to roll. And we roll and roll. And we roll to the bottom of the hill. And we had a cooler in ours that had, Rod liked to drink milk, and he had a half gallon of milk in this cooler, and the cooler came open and the container bounced off my head and knocked me out and broke on my head. So I'm covered with milk. I'm just coming to at the bottom of the hill. Hummer's sitting there. It hadn't caved in, believe it or not. The roll cage that was in it had been designed by one of the engineers in one of the other vehicles. He came up and said, wow, I'm glad it worked. I go, me too. But anyway, all 4 tires were flat and the windshield was broken. The driver goes, let's see if we can get the central tire inflation to pump them up again. Well, sure enough, he was able to pump up the tires. We drive down the wash to where there's a little less of a hill and we were able to get back up on the road. Next thing we know, here comes Rod about 100 miles an hour back up the road. What happened to you guys? And they go, oh, we went off trying to chase. He goes, oh, and he looks, he goes, oh, that's where Walker went off the last race. Come on, let's go. And he turns around and just takes off again. But that was a lesson to me that Rod Hall is a good driver. Yes. Was a good driver. So is Walker Evans. Walker and I have a few interesting times. In fact, he called me and said, you want to go out to Johnson Valley with me? And I go, sure. What for? He goes, I'm getting interested in this rock crawling thing. And I know you kind of had something to do with it. And I go, yeah, I'm not in it, but he goes, well, take me out there. Show me what's up. So we went up. The sledgehammer was done and jackhammer was only half finished. Didn't have the second half. It only came in at the mailbox there. But took him out there. Randy came along and Walker and Randy just followed us and it was great. It was so much fun to 4-wheel with him and watch him decide whether he wanted to rock crawl or not. That was fun. Walker, wish happy birthday, and he wishes me a happy birthday. That's about it. Since I've moved up to Utah, up to central northern Utah, kind of lost touch. But Walker is great. Oh, Rod later on that Hummer adventure in Mexico, I can never sleep. I've never slept well. So I'm awake half the time that night and I hear noises out by the vehicles. So I go out there and I'm looking in the vehicles and here's someone in the vehicle Rod was driving. And I pound on the window because it's guy's kind of laying in there. And I thought it was somebody in there working on something that's unbolted or something. I pound on the window and the guy turns around and I shine my flashlight and it's Rod. I go, what are you doing? And he goes, I don't know. I like to get to be one with the vehicles that I'm thinking of driving. So I just thought I'd come out here and sleep in it all night long. I go, okay, see ya. And he is a character. And every once in a while I'd get a message on LinkedIn from Rod and it would just be, how's Phil? And I'd answer him, oh, I'm fine, doing good. How are you? He wouldn't answer back. But every once in a while, he'd just send a message. It was an interesting relationship. But what great guys all those guys are and were.
Absolutely.
Anyway, and then also, before I go, I'd like to mention the guys who I know that who helped with our projects. Guys like John Bundrant, and who was the Toyota guru, still is, but I guess he's not involved with All Pro anymore. I don't know.
No, he sold it.
Yeah, okay. And then up here we have, of course, Milt Thompson, who's like the guru of being able to fix anything with anything. I mean, if you break out in the middle of nowhere and you're with Milt, you're okay.
Yes.
Because he can fabricate and make up stuff. And he's great. And then of course there's John Williams, Impulse Off-Road. And he's fantastic. He knows the vehicles inside and out, especially Jeeps and Fords. And his brother Nate, one of the finest fabricators I've ever seen, as is Jeremy Thompson, Milt's son. Do you know Jeremy?
Yes.
Yeah, he now runs Eminence Off-Road, his own business. He split off from his family. And if you can get in with Jeremy, you've done well. You'll know your vehicle's going to be good. The trouble with him is he's one guy and he has so many people around the country that want to use him that he's, you know, busy.
Absolutely.
Then there's Johnny Roca down in Southern Cal. I mean, all these guys, and so many others. I mean, Jason Pauly, Shannon Campbell, you know, it's just Ned Bacon. Guys, I'm so sorry that I haven't mentioned you, you know, other ones. I mean, our club, we were in our club. Do you remember our club?
Oh,
It
yes.
was the letter R. That was, we started a club, and it was Walker was in it, Harold Off, Pat Vermillion, Joel Randall, of course, had Morris Hansen, John Curry was in it. The guys from Nebraska, like Rich Hudson, they were all friends. Joel and do you know Morris Hansen?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. They're all buddies in Nebraska. They're all the Nebraskan guys. Rookie came in later. I mean, once they started competing, Jeff, I mean, what a natural driver he is and was.
Definitely. Yes.
Chris Durham, you know, Chris and I didn't interact that much. He was in different circles, as was I, and we'd see each other once in a while. And I was spotting people up Pritchard one day, and here comes Chris, and they go, "Hey, get this," whoever was down, you know, helping people up to the point where I was, said, "Hey, help this guy get up there." I go, "No," I go, "That's Chris Durham. He doesn't need any help from me." And then he leaned out, he goes, "Yeah, you can help." So I helped spot him, but I still don't think he needed any. But you know, his low center of gravity Jeeps, we were all building them. They seemed to get higher and higher as we wanted more clearance. And then Chris built these ones with no lift at all that worked great. It inspired me to build a couple of LCG Jeeps. My trouble was I like to go fast too. There was no up travel, at least in the ones I built. Maybe Chris had better engineering, but mine would bottom out, right away as soon as you hit stuff going fast. I went back to kind of happy medium, just a little bit of lift. But Chris really influenced the industry with a lot of his designs, his hood and his, he came out with a hood and no fenders thing. And then Shannon Campbell built that. And I don't know if Chris and Shannon talked or anything, but Shannon had that great, remember the hood and the fenders, the high
lines. Yep.
Yeah, the high lines. These guys, I'd like to go four-wheeling with them again, the ones who are still alive. So guys, if any of you watching this, you've probably tuned out long before because of my mouth. Let's get together and go four-wheeling again.
I say meet it at Danny Grimes during Easter Jeep next year, if they allow us to.
Absolutely. Danny, he's not only a great driver, he's a crack up to be with, you know.
Absolutely.
I think it was Danny that one year we were at the bottom of White Knuckle, and it was just a bunch of friends, so it wasn't a run. I think it was Danny, and it might not have been, but I'm pretty sure it was him. He gets up to the bottom of the big vertical part, and so he gets up and he's off, and then he floors it, and that Jeep leaped. It was like a Harrier jet. It leaped vertically and then just landed on the top of the ledge. He didn't touch the ledge. It was hilarious. And then he's just sitting there. Everybody's laughing. You go, "What?" I think that was Danny. He might say that wasn't me. but yeah, it was fun. Phil Collard, you had a Samurai at one time, I think, didn't you?
Nope, not me.
Not you? Well, I went through a period where I had a couple, and we built them. Ken Francisco Zook and I put them together. Dan Mick had a Samurai, and then Phil Dean Bullock. I remember he had a stretched one that was pretty cool. But there was a little period there in the mid '90s when I had a Samurai, and three of us, Zook and me and Dan, went down to Farmington to just wheel with Phil and Jim Peterson and Harold Off, those guys. And they have an obstacle on one of the trails called Riff Raff. And they called it that because they said, "Oh, it's too hard. It keeps the riff raff off the trail." So we're at the end of the line. They put us at the end because the cheesy samurais. And all three of us get up there, and Phil comes down, and Phil Collard and says, well, we got to change the name now. The riffraff got up the trail. But I got him back because a little further up, he got stuck and couldn't go back or come forward up a hill. So I pulled him up there with my samurai and got pictures. People got pictures of it on the strap. And I've always threatened him with those pictures. I mean, I haven't talked to him for years now, but I always threatened him. One of these days I'm going to publish that. He goes, what, me pushing you with my strap? But it was fun. Man,
those are great stories.
Four-wheeling has always been a lot of fun, and it still is.
Absolutely. Well, so, Phil, thank you so much for spending the time with us and sharing your history and your experiences and everything that you've done in the industry to get us to where we're at nowadays. You know, we're going to have to pick up the conversation again down the road and do this maybe in person. I hope that we can make that happen.
I'd be happy to do it. And I apologize. My mouth runs. And
don't worry about it.
My story.
Great interview.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks. And for everybody I didn't mention, well, you'll edit this, but I do feel bad because I know there's a ton of other people that I haven't mentioned that deserve to be mentioned.
Well, a lot of them will end up on conversations with Big Rich in the future.
Well, good. And they'll forget to mention me. So then
it'll all wash out in the end.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Rich. And really, if you get down here, like if you're headed down to see your son in southern Utah, I just live in Eagle Mountain now.
Okay.
And so maybe give me a call, maybe get together for lunch or dinner or something, or stop by or whatever.
Sounds great.
All right.
All right, Phil. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Have a great evening.
You too.
If you enjoy these podcasts, please give us a rating. Share some feedback with us via Facebook or Instagram, and share our link among your friends who might be like-minded. Well, that brings this episode to an end. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll catch you next week with Conversations with Big Rich. Thank you very much.